Jung wrote, "You can distinguish a number of functions in consciousness. They enable consciousness to become oriented in the field of ectopsychic facts and endopsychic facts. What I understand by the ectopsyche is a system of relationship between the contents of consciousness and facts and data coming in from the environment. It is a system of orientation which concerns my dealing with the external facts given to me by the function of my senses. The endopsyche, on the other hand, is a system of relationship between the contents of consciousness and postulated processes in the unconscious. For Jung, two basic processes are in play in the psyche. One, taking data from the environment, a neutral, passive process, and two, interpreting this data, deciding what to do with this data, how to act on it, a directed active process. One concerns perceiving and two concerns judging. Jung wrote, "In the first place, we will speak of the ectopsychic functions. First of all, we have sensation, our sense function. By sensation, I understand what the French psychologists call la fonction du réel, the function of the real, which is the sum total of my awareness of external facts given to me through the function of my senses. So I think that the French term la fonction du réel explains it in the most comprehensive way. Sensation tells me that something is. It does not tell me what it is, and it does not tell me other things about that something. It only tells me that something is." This is a critical point. Sensation simply registers the existence of something. Establishing what that something is belongs to an entirely different mode of mental activity. Scientists have never grasped this. Scientists imagine that science is all about observation, sensing, step one of their defining method. In fact, science is all about creating hypotheses and theories to account for observational data. And this process of hypothesis formation has nothing to do with the senses and is all about the thinking function, the intellect. Science regards the detection of data by the human senses or technological extensions of the human senses as the real part of science. It then regards hypothesis formation, using concepts above all those of mathematics, as the unreal part of science. So, all scientific observations are, according to science, real, while all hypotheses and theories are unreal, man-made, made up, which would account for why science is always changing its interpretive theories of reality. Yet science's practical success is entirely based on its hypotheses and theories, not on the particular data it collected. Here's the simplest fact. Observational data is useless until intellectually interpreted. Animals perceive the world all the time but know absolutely nothing about reality. They form no hypotheses or theories, hence cannot explain anything. They merely respond instinctually to everything, which is to say they are always in default mode. They're on permanent autopilot. Observation is a necessary condition for conducting science, but it's not the sufficient condition, despite what all scientists erroneously believe. It's the application of mathematical concepts to data in order to organize, understand, and explain the data, which is the sufficient condition for science, without which there would be no viable science. Before science embraced mathematics, it was literally useless. Alchemy preceded mathematical science. How many modern scientists refer to alchemy? Yet alchemy was exceptionally faithful to the scientific method. It was all about methodical experiments, careful observations, painstaking work in laboratories, asking relevant questions, and so on. Everything that modern science espouses, yet the whole subject was absurd because it ignored mathematics. Alchemy's entire interpretive framework was nonsense because mathematics did not feature in it. Most of philosophy is nonsense too, for exactly the same reason. Science became successful purely because it started using mathematics, hence started intersecting with reality, which is entirely mathematical and not at all scientific, i.e., alchemical. It ought to have occurred to scientists that if mathematics is the sufficient condition for conducting science, and mathematics in itself has nothing at all to do with observations and experiments because it is analytic and a priori, then metaphysics, higher science, that which foundationally explains science, must in fact be nothing other than mathematics. What could be more rational and logical than that eternal and necessary mathematics explains temporal and contingent science, that analytic a priori? Mathematics explains synthetic a posteriori science, that rational mathematics explains empirical science? If this were not the case, science would have no rational and logical foundations. It would be based on 1. An infinite regress, where nothing can ever be explained because the system has no roots, no foundation, no bottom. Or 2. On infinite possibilities, the multiverse, for which no explanation can be offered. Once again, there are no roots, there is no foundation, no bottom. Or 3, on existence, randomly jumping out of non-existence for no reason, to no purpose, via no mechanism. A category error, and once again a system with no roots, no foundation, no bottom, no conceivable explanation. Bizarrely, science prefers all 3 of these non-answers to any suggestion that mathematics is ontological and underpins and explains all of science. Scientists are repulsed by that idea and will do anything to avoid it, yet they regard themselves as rational and logical. That's the last thing they are. They prefer anything to reason and logic. They use mathematics all the time, yet fundamentally hate it and deny its reality. How weird is that? These scientists are people of faith in materialism and empiricism. But this faith falls if idealism and rationalism, ontological mathematics, is true. Like all religious beliefs, science refuses to accept whatever challenges its blind, mindless faith, in its case in the limited, fallible, unreliable, and delusional human senses. Descartes destroyed empiricism centuries ago. Scientists never got the memo. They still keep trotting out crazy empiricist nostrums and keep denying the reality of rationalist mathematics. Jung wrote, "The next function that is distinguishable is thinking. Thinking in its simplest form tells you what a thing is. It gives a name to the thing. It adds a concept because thinking is perception and judgment. German psychology calls it apperception." Hegel said, "An idea is always a generalization, and generalization is a property of thinking. To generalize means to think." In Hegel's terms, ultimate thinking is ultimate generalization, ultimate universalism. What would existence be made of other than the ultimate universals, which can be applied to anything? What are the ultimate universals? They are sinusoidal waves, basis thoughts, from which absolutely anything, including all material things, all space and all time, all emotions, all perceptions, all intuitions, can be made. Existence is a monism. It's a monism of thought, of thinking, which is why thinking, not feeling, perception, or mystical intuition, is best qualified to elucidate it. Mathematics, the subject of universals, tells us what reality is. Science, the subject of particulars, does not. Science gives us particular data about particular things. Mathematics gives us all data about all things. Mathematics is universal, while science is only particular. Mathematics can explain science as a particular application. Science cannot explain mathematics. It cannot get from particulars to universals. This is the famous problem of induction. Science can make a claim such as, all swans are white. Maybe scientists had seen 1,000,000 particular swans and they were all white. Every swan you yourself saw might have been white too, so you were highly inclined to believe science. But what would you do when you saw your first black swan? The theory of all swans being white has been falsified. This is the sword of Damocles that always hangs over science. Induction never proves anything. It never can. Only deduction provides proof. Black swans always destroy science. They never destroy mathematics, which is all about analytic universals, and cannot be disproved by any particular. Mathematics, the universal subject, explains all particulars. It's the only subject which can. Scientists have never understood the nature of either mathematics or thinking. Jung wrote, "Thinking, if you ask a philosopher, is something very difficult. So never ask a philosopher about it, because he is the only man who does not know what thinking is. Everybody else knows what thinking is. When you say to a man, 'Now think properly,' he knows exactly what you mean, but a philosopher never knows." These are unfortunate anti-intellectual statements by Jung. He believed that thinking was about passing judgment on perceptions. In fact, the quintessential thinking, as Hegel understood but Jung didn't, is about concepts, analysis, generalization, and universalization. The senses quintessentially deal with percepts, while thinking quintessentially deals with concepts. Science deals with particular percepts. Mathematics deals with universal concepts. That's why mathematics stands beneath science, supporting science, and not vice versa. The reality, the ontology of concepts, is the #1 problem for science. Science can never universalize itself, i.e., find the grand unified final theory of everything, because it does not accept the existence of universal concepts as the building blocks of existence. It believes in material, sensory, perceptual things as the basis of existence, not immaterial, non-sensory, conceptual things. It believes in a sensory reality, not a reality of thinking, of thought, of purely mental activity. It is materialist, not idealist. It is empiricist, not rationalist. It is perceptual, not conceptual. Hence, it is fundamentally opposed to mathematics, even though it could not function without mathematics. Once you accept that the building units of reality are conceptual, not perceptual, you transition from science to ontological mathematics. You use reason and logic, thinking, to understand reality, not your senses, observation. Jung wrote, "The third function you can distinguish and for which ordinary language has a term is feeling." Here minds become very confused, and people get angry when I speak about feeling, because according to their view, I say something very dreadful about it. Feeling informs you through its feeling tones of the values of things. Feeling tells you, for instance, whether a thing is acceptable or agreeable or not. It tells you what a thing is worth to you. On account of that phenomenon, you cannot perceive and you cannot apperceive without having a certain feeling reaction. You always have a certain feeling tone, which you can even demonstrate by experiment. Feeling, by generating a response of pleasure or pain, liking or disliking, tells us whether something is agreeable or disagreeable, attractive or repulsive, something we want or something we don't want, something that draws us in or pushes us away, something that is desirable or undesirable, attractive or ugly. Jung wrote, "Now the dreadful thing about feeling is that it is, like thinking, a rational function. All men who think are absolutely convinced that feeling is never a rational function, but, on the contrary, most irrational. Feeling, historically, has always been regarded as irrational, hence the opposite of rational thinking. Jung himself made feeling the opposite of thinking, so it's somewhat idiosyncratic that he claimed thinking and feeling were both rational." Jung wrote, "If a man is perfect in his thinking, he is surely never perfect in his feeling, because you cannot do the two things at the same time. They hinder each other. Therefore, when you want to think in a dispassionate way, really scientifically or philosophically, you must get away from all feeling values." Poor old love and lighters. They're incapable of thinking scientifically, philosophically, or mathematically. Everything they say is irrational. Jung wrote, "Values are no anchors for the intellect, but they exist, and giving value is an important psychological function. If you want to have a complete picture of the world, you must necessarily consider values. If you do not, you will get into trouble." It's extraordinary that Jung seemed to believe that the intellect has no interest in values. You need to intellectually value things in order to direct your intellect at this and not that, in order to decide what is unintellectual and what is anti-intellectual. Jung wrote, "To many people, feeling appears to be most irrational, because you feel all sorts of things in foolish moods. Therefore, everybody is convinced that you should control your feelings." The many people are right. Feeling is irrational, or at best, differently rational. The sufficient reasons feelings provide are not well considered. They are not the product of long reflection and analysis. They reflect whatever mood the person is in right here, right now, absent of intellect.